Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reske.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
Back to the S's, like did you see any of the other S's?
Oh yeah, let's go to that because I want to go through I think two big themes that come to the law. So let's come back to the two big themes.
Okay.
But first I'll finish with the S's because I think there's one other really significant S that comes out. So we talked about scale in those verses, substitution with building the altar. But the other one is sequence. And Deuteronomy is one of the best places in the Bible for the whole concept of sequence. And we'll do a podcast on sequence, a whole one dedicated to it.
Yes.
Right?
What is sequence?
Well, the basic idea of sequence, right? In the gospel, that's not the gospel. Unlike every other religion, is I obey, therefore I'm accepted, right? But the gospel is
I'm accepted based on what Jesus did on the cross. Therefore, I obey.
That's exactly right.
So there's a difference between religion and the gospel. Religion is I obey, therefore I'm accepted, which is sort of the default setting of everybody's heart. That's right. We think that that's how it should go. But the gospel is something totally different. It's that I'm accepted because of the finished work of Christ, because of what he did on my behalf. Therefore, I obey. And man, that makes a huge difference. You can see two different religious people. One's operating off of the religious concept, and one is operating from the gospel. And sometimes you can't tell them really apart. Because it's a way they operate from their heart. They can both be doing very good, lots of good works. They can both attending church, reading the same Bible, but they would read Dueteronomy in a different way. They would be reading it I got to obey all of those things.
That's right. If I want to be accepted, I got to obey, right? And so even and this is what we struggle with, right? Even as believers say, yes, I was justified by Jesus' blood, but to be sanctified, to be really accepted by God, I got to keep all these rules, right? So
so how does this come out in Deuteronomy?
So one of the our hero Tim Keller points this out so beautifully, right? So God does not. You think about where this was in history. We recapped it earlier. God does not give the 10 Commandments to the children of Israel at the beginning of their captivity in Egypt and say, I'm going to give you the rules and I'm going to watch you for 400 years and I'm going to see how you do. And if you play your cards right, and you think about God could have given the sermon that Moses gives at the beginning of the captivity. Look, I'm setting before you a choice. Blessings and curses. You can get yourself out of captivity anytime you want. If you just follow the law perfectly, I'll open the gates. I can do it anytime I want. I'm watching you. Let's see how you do. I mean, that is, I obey, therefore I'm accepted. God doesn't do that at all. In fact, and the beauty is, God delivers them and then gives them the law. And when the 10 Commandments are in Exodus, but they're also reiterated here in Moses' sermon in Deuteronomy. When Moses reiterates his sermon in Deuteronomy, the intro in chapter 5, you'll see it comes up a couple times, but chapter 5, verse 6 is one place where it comes up, where he says, look, I am the Lord your God who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. Now, number one, you must have no other gods before me. He gives him the 10 Commandments. Other places where he says, I am the Lord your God. I rescued you with the mighty power of my outstretched arm. I rescued you. Like sequence. I accept you. I gave you salvation. Now, therefore, as a result of what I've given you by sheer grace, I want you to do these things, right? And that's sequence in a nutshell. It's actually, like I said, I think it's one of the best places in the whole Bible for that concept of sequence, right?
Yeah. Oh man, that's great.
Yeah, and the other place in Deuteronomy that kind of amplify it. God says, look, it wasn't because you were like a big nation that I loved you. It wasn't because you were a powerful nation that I loved you. It wasn't because you were strong. It wasn't because you were rich. You were none of those things. And you're going to think it's because of your righteousness, but it's not. It wasn't because you're righteous. You weren't righteous. I chose you because I loved you, just because I loved you. And that's, you're accepted now, therefore obey.
Yeah. In the Old Testament, the Egypt is mentioned 645 times. In the
Oh,
book of
wow.
Deuteronomy, it's mentioned 49 times. And I'm thinking every, so especially in Deuteronomy, I think every time he's bringing it up, he's reminding them that of that truth.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Like when he talks about
Because
immigrants,
what? Because they could have been like,
foreigners.
they could have moved on from, like, hey, Egypt, that, you're out of Egypt, so let's forget about it. But God keeps bringing it up.
Yeah, it's a good point, Craig. There's a lot of in the Bible that's like the phrase "lest you forget." You know, there's actually within that's a big concept I think in the Bible. Lest you forget, I want you to remember these things. That's why you build little stone altars as markers sometimes in the Bible. I want to remember these things. I want you to bring these things to mind. And there's one chapter in the book of Deuteronomy that's a little bit almost like time travel. It's like I'm giving the blessings, sermons, I'm giving the blessings and curses. I think it's chapter 30, where he looks ahead a little bit. And he said, there's going to come a time. Oh, where is it? There's going to come a time when here he's like looking ahead. Like it's chapter 30, verse 1. Like I'm giving you this choice, right? Blessings and curses. Do the right thing. You'll get blessings. Do the wrong thing. You get curses. And in 30, the first verse says, and when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before you, and you call them to mind, right? Lest you forget, remember, and you
Yeah.
call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord your God has driven you. So you're going to be like, the exile and be dispersed. And so it's like, I'm looking way ahead in the future. And when I want you to look back on this and think about this, right? And dwell on what happened for you. And it talks about you're going to come back, like a remnant will come back, and I'll have mercy on you again. So it's like in the middle of saying, yes, here are the choices, you're not going to do them. But I'm looking way ahead in the future to a time when you're going to look back on this, remember it, and you're going to come back. So yeah, bring these things to mind, lest you forget.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Sequence.
Yeah,
That's
sequence.
so we'll talk more about sequence in a future podcast.
Yeah. So let's talk about, I think I guess about one of the general tensions in the book that I found going through these laws, and like why would God have all these laws? So as a Christian, how do you read these laws now? What's the point, right? You're supposed to, if you're supposed to be keeping them, if you're not supposed to be just like read this as a rule book to keep, then how do you read it? What's the benefit? And so the tension I saw, Greg, going through it that I wrestled with was that there's all those laws on sexual purity. And we Christians have always said, yeah, those are really bindless and timeless and binding.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a certain mindset that says, yeah, see, those are important. Personal holiness. That's what I'm talking about. And there's a whole bunch of godless people in the world that don't do that. And you can gravitate towards that. But then there's a whole bunch of other rules.
Yeah.
They're pretty, and not just one little place, like again and again and again and again, where he says, I want you to take care of the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner among your midst. So I guess
Yes.
apparently they were like people traveling with them. They weren't Jews. They weren't part of the chosen people. They're with them. And there's lots and lots of verses about you got to take care of these people.
Yeah.
And you have an obligation to others. You may not feel it, you may not like them, you may not care about them, whatever it is, but you have an obligation to them. And there's obligations like financially, like, hey, you have a field and there's a piece of it that you haven't quite harvested, just leave it. You got to leave it for them to come and so they can feed, so
Yeah.
they can get something to eat. And then and you're giving, you've got to take care of them financially. You have an obligation to them. But then the most fascinating one, I think I might have shared this before, is chapter 16, verse 14. It says, be joyful at your festival. You, your sons and daughters, your family, you're going to festival with your family, right? Family oriented. Your male and female servants, so your employees, okay, so you got, they're with you as well. and the Levites, the priest tribe. So okay, you always include the Levites. And then it says at the festival, the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns. So in other words, it's not just that you can say, I just got to give money to them, write them a check and keep them alive. That's fine. That's my obligation. God, okay, I'll do it. You got to include them.
Yeah.
You're supposed to include them in your culture, in your society. Bring them in. And so anyway, two different big picture themes in the book of Deuteronomy. There's others too. There's like property rights and there's idol worship and destroy the altars, all kinds of things. But two big themes, right? Personal purity and caring for the outsiders, the downcast, you know, the people have no voice of their own. Like there's a bunch of rules that talk about justice. So when these people go in front of a king, they have nothing to offer. They can't buy favors in front of
Yeah.
a judge or a king. And they're supposed to get equal justice. You got to make sure that you treat them no differently than the richest person in town.
Yeah.
So my point in looking at this and thinking about these and grouping these together is that I think is generally people kind of gravitate towards one or the other, right? And
Yeah. And churches do too.
churches do too, and throughout history, Christians done that. So I do think if you look back in church history, the Christian church, especially in the early times, and I think a lot of ways was noted for this. You know, you had sexual purity, holding to that, but then also always being the one that was there for outsiders, outcasts, the outsiders of society. And I think it's where actually there's the whole different talk there, Greg, about Jesus was crucified outside the gate, right? There's a metaphor there. He was
Right.
Christianity's always been for outsiders, right?
Yeah.
But we tend to gravitate towards one or the other, and not put them together. So when I was doing this, I was thinking of your construct. You always think about with the two thieves, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So like how Jesus was crucified between two thieves. There's one on his right, one on his left, and and I should say that I got this concept from Tim Keller,
Who got it from
where
Tertullian, the
who
church,
got it
early
from,
church,
right, right.
right?
Well, Tim Keller's like a brilliant, you know, brilliant mind, and lot of his revelations came from some of those dead old guys, you know. But anyway, there's two thieves of the gospel today. And on the one hand, there's legalism, where we just want to follow the rules. And that's a typical religious person who doesn't understand the gospel. And then there's license, which is someone who is typically irreligious. They just follow their heart. Or it's a religious person that says, God's forgiven me for God just loves me so much, he's going to forgive me for anything I do, so I can just live however I want.
That's right.
Both of those are thieves of the gospel. They're not really the true gospel. The center cross represents Christ and following Jesus. And um, so anyway,
Yeah.
how did you see this in Deuteronomy, or what?
Well, so I thought it'd be like, well, it's an easy way to look at it. See, there's people who follow the rules. They're the moral people. There's people who follow the heart. They're the immoral people. And the moral people will read Deuteronomy, follow the rules, right? That's what you're supposed to do. And then and wrestling with, I thought, no, people look at this. It's both and neither. I like to put people in those camps, right? That there are people who follow the rules, people who follow the heart. And by the way, I think it's an incredibly useful construct because I love the way you describe it when you talk about it, Greg. You say that people think there's two ways, but the gospel is the third way, right? You've broken all the rules. Someone else did it for you as your substitute.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a very helpful construct. But I was looking at Deuteronomy, I felt like it's both and neither, because people follow the rules. They're not like, they don't look at it moral or immoral. They follow those. They just choose the rules they want to follow. So they follow their heart to choose the rules to be a rule follower. Right. So my heart says that these rules on sexual purity are, eternal. And I think you got to keep your nose clean. And that's the important thing. And I stand firmly against those people that are sinners that aren't doing those things, because I don't do those things, and I'm winning on that scale. And that's what I like to gravitate towards, and I think about that. So, and other people say those rules are ridiculous; they don't apply anymore. But what really happens, the most important thing is caring about the poor. And all you people, you're trying to preach your gospel, your your rules to me on my sexual morality. Are you really caring for the poor? I care about the poor, and I care about the poor and the powerless and the outsiders. But both are both are following their heart to find the rules they like, and it's kind of like both and neither. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that. That's very insightful.
yeah, so there's a story I'll tell when I give this talk, and so people if they listen to the podcast will hear it twice, but it kind of really came home to me. I think I told you this. I told you the story before. We were talking before about this conversation I had with this woman in New York when I was practicing law in New York, and I was a corporate lawyer, and we were at some corporate lunch funded by some big corporation that was, buying lunch for all of us, and she did a lot of pro bono work for people that couldn't afford legal counsel for themselves. And she liked doing that, and we had this engaging discussion. And the backdrop to this, though, Greg, is that I felt like when I was a young Christian in New York that I was going to be the one who is the moral one in a sea of immoral godlessness, right? And these, by the shining witness of my exemplary life, people were going to come to Jesus and see the difference between light and darkness, and how I was living a upright moral life in this awful sea of wickedness, right? And
Right, right.
and then talking to her a little bit, and at the time I'm a corporate lawyer defending these big corporations, right? And that's what we did. And talk more about our work, and it was and at one point I forget how the whole conversation went, but it got a little testy, and she was just like, look, I care about the poor. I care about the powerless. I care about the homeless. I care about the people that have no rights on their own. I care about the outsiders, the downcast, the downtrodden. What do you care about? Huh? And it's like, oh, and it's like, yeah, what do you care about? Big corporations. Is that what you're giving your life to? And it was a good moment. It was a good life lesson moment for me. She did not think that she was the immoral one, and I was the upstanding moral Christian, right? She had the
Right.
moral high ground. She's like,
Yeah.
so and she would have gone right, and she didn't. We didn't talk about Deuteronomy, but she would take me right to all those past Deuteronomy. What about this? What do you do? What are you giving your life to? Here's the widows and the orphans. What are you doing? What do you care about? So she was not immoral. So she was not like in that concept. She was not follow your heart while I was follow the rules. She was she was very in her mind very moral, right? She's like,
Right.
I'm doing all the right things. What are you doing? You're the immoral jerk. Right. And I could talk, well, I think that rules of sexual purity still apply. Like, she would have said, well, keep that to your most self. You're giving your life to all the wrong things. But my little epiphany there is like, everybody does that. No one really balances this well. Look, it's not a political podcast, but no political party does both, right? No political party ever does both because people don't do both. People gravitate towards one or the other, and pick and choose the laws they like. So my the phrase I use when I teach is everyone I think is a relative moralist, maybe a moral relativist, right?
Yeah.
It's not just immoral people and moral people. See, that's the way you see the world. Like if you see the world that way, stop seeing the world that way, because then what you're doing is you're saying I am the moral one, they're the immoral ones, okay? And I see the world like this. I keep my nose clean, and they don't. Everyone's a moralist, just the moralist in the rules they think are important, and they're found they're hard to find those rules.
Yeah.
So
That is so
right.
true.
So as I'm wrestling with Deuteronomy, thinking, okay, so then what's the answer? Like, I'll do all of it. There's 613 rules in the Torah. I'll just do all of it. Maybe I should. Maybe that's the Christian application. And the problem with that is that's exactly what the Pharisees did. That's what the Pharisees are trying to do. And Jesus comes along and says, no, that's not the answer. He doesn't commend the Pharisees. He doesn't say, finally, someone's putting the law into practice. Right.
Yeah.
He doesn't. So why is all this stuff here? You know, uh, what is it? What does it tell you? Why is it here? And I think one of the reasons it here, let me see if I can pull this up for you, Greg, and show you. I think a lot of the reason this whole thing is written, is to say, look, I'm giving you blessings and curses. I'm going to show you the blessings if you do right, curses if you don't, to show you how spiritual reality really works.
Hmm.
And within the book, he's saying, I know you're not going to do this, but I know someday you're going to come back. You look back at this and you're going to realize your hearts will be open. You're going to have a circumcision of your heart. You'll have a change from the inside out. But the whole relentless blessings, curses, blessings, curses, blessings, curses. I'm trying to show you. And then, by the way, 2,000 years of the sacrificial system where you're going to be sacrificing animals and blood sacrifice to show you that there's real consequences for sin. And it's going to make it really real to you. You see spilled blood that has to be spilled for sin. I'm trying to tell you how spiritual reality works. It is concrete. It is real. It is more real than the chair you're sitting on. That there are laws that are immutable laws, and they exist whether you know about them or not, whether you agree with them or not. You say, "Well, I like that rule, but I don't like that." It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The guy Moses is trying to communicate to them is there is spiritual reality. What God is trying to do is get your heart in touch with that spiritual reality. And that's why you go to the song when he says, look, let's sing this together. God is completely white hot holy. You are a moral failure.
Yeah. That's
Sing it with me now. It's not a pep talk, so you can. He said, not the point is not saying I'm giving you all these rules as a so you could assemble a bridge to bridge the gap between you and God. Go. That's, I think, the wrong reading of the law, right? The gospel reading law is Jesus comes by and says, not any bit of that law passed away. I just fulfilled it all for you in your place as your substitute. Right? But the law is there to say spiritual reality is binding. Spiritual reality is, as real as a physical law that says if you jump off a cliff, you're going to hit bottom. I mean, I think and what we're saying is, look, this is the way spiritual reality works. If you live the way God lays out, there are blessings. If you live the opposite way, there are curses. And it works that way, the way you like it or not, whether you really want to do it or not, you feel like it or not, whether you even agree with it or not. But that's the way spiritual reality works. Anyway, that's one of the bigger takeaways I got from the book of Deuteronomy.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great discussion. Is there anything else you want to add? I mean, I think this has been a great I'm looking forward to your actual talk, and I know you're just kind of jumping around here.
Yeah, I'm still kind of piecing it all together, so I hope it all gels at the last minute like it usually does. So we'll
Isn't
see.
it interesting? Isn't it interesting how when you really, if you look at the Old Testament through the lens of the gospel, you find uh, these pointers that point us to Jesus.
Amen. Oh, and on every page, right? What's that? I think there's a book with that title. Every story whispers his name.
Oh yeah, every story.
Yeah, every page of the book. Jesus is on every page of the book, right? It's all about him. The book is not, the Bible's not about you. It's not about me. So it's all about him. What was he doing? So yeah, and so yeah, I'll kind of steal my thunder at the because at the end I think the ultimate way to understand the book of Deuteronomy is because when you say here's this list of blessings and curses, so what am I supposed to do as a Christian? I got to reorient my life and do the right thing so I get blessings and not do bad things so I get curses. That's the main message. That's the thrust of the book. And I don't think that's the thrust of the book. I do think there's spiritual reality, by the way. And I think I asked you that maybe we did this on a previous podcast, the consequences of, like, remember, like I said, like as a Christian, if I say I believe in God, but I'm going to quit my job and start doing hard drugs, will there be consequences for that? Yeah, absolutely. Will God love me any less? No, but there are consequences, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way. But the main point of this, and I hope that and get this comes out when we actually do the study together, is that blessings and curses. Jesus takes the curses so that we get the blessings.
Yeah.
And if you start reading a chapter, especially in chapter 28, the curses that are listed there, and you start thinking especially how you think about Jesus when he was a young Jew, like at age 12, would have started being trained in this. He would start reading the Torah, and he would have read this, right? And even verses like verse 28, verse 33, you should be openly oppressed and crushed continually. And you thought about Isaiah 53, right? He was crushed for our iniquities, right? It was bruised for our sins, crushed for our iniquities. Chapter 28, verse 37, you shall become a horror, a proverb, a byword among all the peoples, where the Lord will lead you away. And Jesus is reading this saying, this is me. This is about me. This is what I've got to do. The curses, you have all earned the curses. You know, I can tell you how spirituality works, tell you what to do to avoid it, but you have all earned these curses, and they will all fall on me. I will read another one. Chapter 28, verse 45. Imagine Jesus reading this. All these curses come upon you and pursue you and overtake you till you are destroyed. Jesus says, yes, that's what I will choose to do willingly in your place as your substitute. And let me read, I'll read one more, 28, verse 66. Your life shall hang in doubt before you. Jesus is, was going to the cross, right? Your life shall hang in doubt before you. Night and day, you shall be in dread and have no assurance of your life. Jesus takes the curses, right? So that we can get all the blessings. And that's the essence, I think, of Deuteronomy. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.